It looks like we'll get to hear from some Leafs players this week as part of some charity work happening in the city. Plus, Kyle Dubas dished on his time in Toronto. What did he have to say that maybe we haven't heard before? We'll talk about that here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf centric podcast hosted by myself, David Morassutti, and Frank Stanisci has been called in from the bullpen, coming off the bench. Mike's not here today, so I have first call always to Frank. So Frank, thank you for answering the call and thank you for coming in.
How are you doing? My pleasure. Always nice to talk hockey in the middle of the summer.
I know. Isn't it the most invigorating stuff to talk about is hockey? I saw the Locked On Senators podcast being like, we're ready for hockey to come back. And one of the reporters was just like, guys, go outside, enjoy the summer. We got shows to talk. We gotta build up things to talk about. Because sooner or later in a few weeks, we're gonna be talking about training camps, the rookie tournament obviously will be something to talk about as well. And Frank, I think the last time I had you on the show, did I have you on after free agency at all? I can't even remember. I had to have you at least once.
No, I don't remember if have I been on since the Leafs traded Marner. I'm not sure.
I feel like you were.
Well, I probably was. I know that in one show you asked me who I thought that he would go to, and I thought it was Vegas. And I wasn't right because I'm intelligent. I was right because it just seemed like him and Matthews are nuts about contracts they signed. And he was going to the Knights. Where did he play junior? That was the whole reason why I thought it would happen, because that's the way they think. He wanted to be a Knight again.
Yeah, I'm honestly trying to remember if I've had you on since then, because it's been obviously a quiet time with everything that's going on. I know Mike and I obviously broke. It either was, Frank, that I had you on before the free agency, and that's what I'm thinking of, is that we talked about some of the other things that were going on kind of in and around the Marner stuff. So that's probably where I'm thinking that you had come in. Now, obviously, catching up for anybody who's maybe hasn't been following the Locked On Leafs podcast. First off, I want to just let you know that this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And just a little recap. I mean, Frank and I were he was like, did I miss, we didn't miss any news? Not really anything, right? Obviously, you called back to the Derek Lalonde hiring back in June. Probably some people forgot that happened. We obviously had the Hall of Fame announcements with McGillney finally getting his name called, and we've had all the moves and stuff that's happened. So there really hasn't been a whole lot of hard news, obviously, with this team, and we're expecting something eventually to happen. We're starting to see some teams make some moves. I think the Rangers had signed a couple of goalies, and so teams are starting to slowly build out areas and holes on the roster, or even in their AHL. But we will actually have potentially some Leafs content to talk about at some point this week, because there is a charity event that's happening in Brampton. It's the Hockey Night in Brampton. Essentially, it's a charity classic, and part of this is you see some players come in, and it's a community event, right? Getting a chance to help for a good cause. This year, it's going to be helping support the building of a hospital in Brampton, a second hospital there, and they're bringing in the big guns because Mitch Marner likely would have participated in something like this if he was still with the Leafs. We know that he's not with the Leafs anymore. He is in Vegas. I've actually been seeing him doing some somebody showed me a picture of him with Joe Thornton. not too long ago. I mean, we know that those guys all keep in touch. So with Mitch Marner out of the picture, in comes Auston Matthews. So for the first time, Auston Matthews will actually be participating in this event, and it's funny because he talked about how seeing guys like Marner, Tavares, even Max Domi. I think Max Domi is going to participate in it again this year, if I'm not wrong. But I think he realized I'm the captain. I need to be more present in events like this, and it's going to be a nice event. You know, Mark Giordano is going to be there. I saw that Curtis Joseph's name was on there.
It surprised me. Wendell Clark was there.
I think, yeah, Wendell Clark's usually on things like that. So there's going to be some notable names at this event, and obviously we'll get to hear a bit from Matthews. I don't think we've heard anything from Matthews since John Tavares signed, but also the Mitch Marner him leaving. So I'm curious. I'm sure whoever is going to be there, there'll be media there, and they'll ask about it. I'm sure that's going to be one of the questions asked. So I kind of think we all understand the kind of answer we could be getting from Matthews in a time like this, but I'll be curious to see how that one all plans out. But like, Frank, what would you expect to hear from Auston Matthews?
From Auston Matthews,
yeah, from a time like not just even about the Marner stuff, but just
what I expect to hear or what I want to hear.
What would you if you were at this event? If you were going to this event at the CAA Center, I think it's sold out. So unfortunately, if you were looking for tickets, maybe somebody's offering them up. But if you were going and you got a chance to ask Auston Matthews a question, what would it be?
Oh, my question would be, Auston, this is going to be an opportunity for you to show how much offense you can generate on your own. Because quite honestly, generating offense is something that he hasn't been given a chance to show that he can do, because it's always been who's going to feed Auston Matthews. And now with Mitch Marner gone, the biggest thing that Auston Matthews, so this is not just something I'd ask him, this is something I'm wondering about. The real question is going to be this year for Auston Matthews. He's made the change from goal scorer to 200-foot game, Auston Matthews, right? Well, there's a step in between that he hasn't accomplished, and that is offense fabricating Auston Matthews. Auston Matthews is a finisher. And as a center, he should be also, because of the position, he should be in a position to feed his wingers. So the question now comes up, can he do that? Can he, we talk about where the Leafs going to get the assists that went out the door with Marner. Well, a lot of them, at least in the first line, have to come from him. And he does have a more than able trigger man in Knies. Now, Michelli, that some people are projecting him to be on the wing. He's a bit of a manufacturer himself. He's a bit of an assist machine, and he's young and he's been getting better every year. But I still, like I said, I would ask him, how important is it for you to establish, as I set it up, you've been a goal scorer, you're improving your 200-foot game. How do you feel about you as a setup guy? And it doesn't mean that that's all he's going to do. I'm just saying, can he do that as well as be a trigger man? And I think that would help him in shooting and scoring as well, because the one thing that has happened over the past few years, and one of the reasons why I'm asking if he can change, because he has to. He's predictable. We all know what he's going to do. And we do know there's guys like Ovechkin that once they set up in their office, they can overcome people's, knowing what they're going to do. The question is, can Matthews do that, or can he add to his repertoire and become a passer?
Yeah, I think there's going to, now with Marner gone, there's going to be an increased spotlight and focus on Auston Matthews, obviously, because first off, how's he feeling health-wise? I mean, he ain't going on the ice if he's not 100%. Like, I don't think he's going into a charity event, and they're saying he's going to captain this event, right? Like, I don't see him standing behind the bench. I think people are expecting him to be on the ice. I don't have any concerns really that he will be 100%. If there is concern, like I wonder, because we know that he said there wasn't any need for doing any surgery. There wasn't any need to do anything other than just getting some rest and probably doing a bit of, training to try to get whatever the injury is healthy. I know that there was, I think on Overdrive, they were talking about his health being in question. I don't know what I don't know. I mean, it's tough to make that assessment without seeing him, right? Seeing what he looks like, and I think Wednesday will be the big one. Like, I like to know how do you feel? Do you feel like you put whatever it was last year behind you, or is this something that's still a question mark? And if it is, it's not something I would want to hear.
David, that this is an ugly conversation, no matter how it turns out, no matter how the questions presented. Matthews has had trouble over his career with the Maple Leafs with injuries. He's had a few also that carried, that were part of the playoffs and then carried in even into the season, continued into the season. The biggest thing with injuries in Matthews is that the thing that shuts everybody up on whether he's healthy or not is him scoring, getting points, being a difference maker on the ice. As long as he struggles, whether he's injured or not, the first thing people are going to say is, I guess he's still injured, huh? And that's the collar that he's wearing right now, and he needs to bust through that. He has to get rid of that collar. He has to be Auston Matthews, the guy that is the go-to man for this Leaf team, the leader, the guy that leads the charge when it comes to scoring and also, of course, winning, which ultimately those are the two things that Leaf fans are going to be probably on the edge of their seats about: watching him be able to score and watching their team be able to win.
Yeah, it'll be something to watch for. And we're actually going to get into a couple things that Kyle Dubas talked about during his time in Toronto. And he did bring up Auston Matthews in it. So why don't we'll take a break here. We'll come back and we'll discuss all that, plus maybe a potential cautionary tale from some of the things that Kyle Dubas did bring up in that podcast that he did appear on. We'll discuss that here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or even on your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data, visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. If you're somebody that wants everything done easy, if you're somebody who's like, why am I spending this much on this? Why am I not able to save the money I feel like I need to be able to save? Well, that's where Monarch can come in handy. They can just tell you certain things that you're spending a little bit more on that you want to be, or you might be using subscriptions that frankly you shouldn't even be paying for anymore. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Want to welcome you all back to the Locked On Leafs podcast. David Morassutti, and joining me today is my guest co-host, Frank Stanisci, who many of you know and friend of the show here. And also want to say thank you everybody who is an everyday. If you've been keeping with us all summer long, we do appreciate it, because I know some people are on vacation, and I know some people says I still listening even though I'm away. I'm like, man, just get a vacation, people. But I appreciate it. Appreciate the loyalty. We appreciate everybody that's making us their first listen to. If this is your first listen of the day, we do appreciate it. And so Mike and I haven't gotten to this yet. I know it was something we were eventually going to talk about. I figured there's no better time than now, because there's not really anything else to talk about. But Kyle Dubas has taken some time to discuss kind of how his tenure in Toronto has gone. He made a podcast appearance on the Cam and Strick podcast. For you who don't know, it's former NHLer Cam Jansen and a St. Louis Blues reporter, Andy Strickland. they've had some pretty good guests on, and obviously getting Kyle Dubas in the offseason, that's a pretty good get for them. And, there's been a lot of reflecting back, which, in some ways, I know a lot of people don't like reflecting back on things because it just opens up old wounds. We do that all the time here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, so go figure. We're going to do that today. But I'm never surprised with Kyle Dubas. He's always been a very candid, open person. He's never really ever held things back in terms of things he said. So they obviously asked him a couple of things, and we'll start with one that I've heard before, but he kind of really went into a full picture. And looking back on what his biggest regret was during his time with the Leafs, can you take a guess, Frank, what maybe he thought the biggest regret was during his Leafs tenure?
It's not fair. I read it. It was the trade of Marchment. So,
Frank cheated.
I'm not gonna pretend.
Okay, so for those of you that haven't listened, or even there's been a few articles too on it. He said it was the Mason Marchment trade. Right, we know Mason Marchment straight up for Dennis Malgin back in February 2020. Obviously, that trade did not work out for the Leafs. We know that they took a gamble on going for a guy who was playing NHL minutes, was seen as a more dependable everyday player versus Mason Marchment, who had been struggling with injuries. The development curve maybe wasn't going the way the Leafs had expected it. Well, unfortunately, once he got traded to Florida, it all turned. And Dennis Malgin turned out not really working out great for the Leafs. And Mason Marchment has gone on to be a key contributor when he was with Florida, then eventually signing in Dallas, where he continues to be a key contributor. And now he will be hoping to kind of do the same with Seattle. Got traded more so because they need to shed salary than him actually not being a good player. And obviously that's one there where I can understand the regret. But at the same time, these are the risks that I think GMs make, Frank, right? When you make those trades, it can work, it can backfire easily, but you have to have conviction in the trades you make.
I'm wondering if he made a subliminal message, if he put out a subliminal message, and that message would have been he traded a big, tough player for a little offensive threat. Was he basically suggesting that maybe that's just the top of the totem pole of his regrets? And I would think, and I think when you talk to Leafs today, maybe not back then, there were a few people like myself who felt that the Leafs were too in love with short, small, talented players. Malgin's not a big guy. He wasn't a big guy. He's like 5'8", 5'9". Very quick. You referred to him as dependable. That's great. Experienced NHL forward, absolutely. But Marchment was something they had very little of. And so I regretted that trade from the moment he did it, because Marchment offered something that the team didn't have much of. And so if it became a need, there it was available to them, right? I think to me, that was a bit of a subliminal message by Dubas, suggesting that maybe he did concentrate too much on size and talent, as opposed to, the kind of, put it this way. He traded away the kind of guy that for years, some of us said Leafs were short on and needed more of. And as time marched on, it became more and more clear that was true, that the Leafs lacked the ability not to fight, but to hold their own, in the corners, around the glass and the borders.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's where we're seeing the change with this Leafs team, right? The emphasis isn't just on getting skill. It's about getting those intangibles as well. You look at the Dakota Joshua trade, right? He's not.
They're letting go. Look who they're letting go, David. The guys that they drafted back a few years, they're not re-signing the 5'8", 5'9" speedy guys, right?
Look at the guys they're drafted now. It's clear the mandate of where they want to go and what they project to be better off in terms of development and stuff too. So yeah, I'm not surprised on that. And and here's the other thing too. I mean, when you look at how this team was built too, right? Like this team was built with a the timeline got accelerated, right? They made the playoffs. It's like, okay, now we need to be pushing ourselves to compete, right? And the only way to compete is if you're making additions every year. But the lack of what's the word I'm looking for here? The lack of flexibility, because they did have a lot of the salary tied up to those players, and even Kyle Dubas brought that up. The salary cap going flat is what hurt them, right? They expected the cap going up. They didn't expect a pandemic. It's pretty fair, I would say, but at the same time, it kind of goes to show, I think, where current management has changed the philosophy in a lot of ways.
Well, I don't know if that's to me, that's more of an excuse than it is an explanation.
Mm-hmm.
He spent money he didn't have. He didn't know he had. He spent money he didn't know he had. You can say that the cap didn't go up, but we all knew at the time that the cap might not go up in spite of COVID. There was talk before COVID that the cap was not going to go up that quick. A lot of people who were against or who commented against the kind of contracts they were sending, they're signing Matthews and Marner and company. A lot of people were saying before COVID that they can't afford to do that, and there's guys like Burke who said the math just doesn't work, and I agreed with him. The math didn't work, but really, I think the big thing with the signings that they made is, for me, it isn't how much they paid these guys, David. It's that they all offered the same qualities. There wasn't a balance in the big contracts. They didn't have a really good number one defenseman back there that they were paying really good money. I know they paid, they eventually paid Riley good money, but not a young stud of a defenseman. They had Nylander, Matthews, and Marner. They're not any different. They're offensive threats. They're scorers. They're great puck handlers. But that's what they are, and there's more to playing hockey than that. And that's really the mistake I think that Dubas made, and that's the mistake, is that he didn't have a contrast in his lineup.
Yeah, well, exactly right. And look, I mean, it's become apparent now where the changes have been made on the blue line in a lot of areas. It's the emphasis of getting some different elements on this team, and so he was asked about a couple of other things. Obviously, the Mike Babcock tenure.
Yeah, that seemed like a backhanded apology almost, didn't it? It seemed like it was not that he was back and going backwards, but he seemed really nice about Babcock.
Yeah, he said the reason why this team was able to make the playoffs as quick as they did, he brought accountability, the detail, the work ethic. We know Mike Babcock had that resume. It's just the other stuff that didn't really work out. And he even said it was kind of clear the group wasn't taking the next step with him. We have to try to find another voice to push us ahead in both the regular season and the playoffs. And that led to the decision to have Sheldon Keefe come aboard. But the big one, and kind of rehashing we're talking about rehashing old wounds. He brought up the Mitch Marner Babcock incident.
The Marner list.
Sorry. Yeah. Where Marner basically was asked to do that work ethic list. And essentially they said, well, what'd you know about it? He's like, I didn't hear about it until you guys heard about it. He was the assistant GM, and the other assistant GM at the time, Brandon Pridham, none of them knew it happened because Lou Lamoriello dealt with it. And Lou basically, I mean, credit to Lou Lamoriello for being able to keep it quiet for that long, because it wasn't until after Lou was gone and Kyle Dubas was the GM that this all came out. And yeah, I think the Toronto Sun were the ones that reported it. Lou Lamoriello, we know he has a way of handling things, and kind of speaks to that. But I was a little surprised that Lou kept it from his assistants. Are you?
No. Lou Lamoriello is the definition of holding things close to his vest. He's the definition of that. I'm not surprised. I'm surprised the media horde being what it is in Toronto, that it didn't slip through. Never mind, somewhere between Marner, Babcock, and Lamoriello. Like once it got to Lamoriello, it died because nothing's gonna come out after that.
No, for sure. We're going to talk about kind of bringing into this conversation because there's a cautionary tale, I think, in all of this. There's a couple of things that he did talk about that I wanted to bring up with you, especially when it comes to how this team improves, what the team uses in terms of assets to improve, but also the idea of pressure on the players. Kyle Dubas did bring this up when they talked about it, so I want to get your thoughts, and we'll discuss that next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you all for sticking with us here on the Locked On Leafs podcast. David Morassutti, and joining me today, obviously, is my friend Frank Stanisci. Frank stepping in with Mike's not able to make it. So we're just discussing the Kyle Dubas situation, obviously, and what he had to say about his time in Toronto. And he brought up kind of 2 points. I want to talk about first the point about the Mason Marchment deal, because obviously at the time, Mason Marchment was nowhere near the complete player that he was, when he joined the Panthers. I'm just trying to remember exactly how old both players were at the time. I'm pretty sure Dennis Malgin. So Malgin was actually younger by a year. He was 23. And Marchment was 24. Now, we also have to remember, Marchment wasn't a drafted player. There wasn't really – he had to kind of work his way up a bit more. So it's not like the Leafs went with an older player. They just went with somebody who they felt just had more – they brought – he was going to bring more offense to the lineup. But what it kind of shows, too, is the cautionary tale of abandoning a player in their development before they become a finished product. And I wanted to bring that up today because there's been a lot of talk about how the Leafs can improve, what they can use to improve. We know that this Leafs team does not have many top draft picks available. I think they have going into next year, into the 2026 draft, they don't have a first round pick. We know that. They don't have a pick in 2026 in this year, or in 2027. They do not have a first round pick. They don't have a second round pick in 2026 either. So obviously, if the Leafs want to potentially make a deal to improve the team, well, guess whose name has been brought up quite often? Auston Cowan, right? He is their top prospect. He's the guy that maybe teams are like, you know what? Now he's getting a lot closer to the NHL. Maybe there's something, valuable to him. Right, maybe a little more value than a draft pick, although some teams just prefer getting the draft pick, but the Leafs don't have that really to offer unless they want to start dipping into 2028 and 2029. And those are tougher draft picks to trade because teams prefer the closer, right? The scouts have kind of determined what picks that they want to use. But the cautionary tale, Frank, and I want to ask you this is, if somebody were to tell you today that the Leafs should consider trading Auston Cowan if they want to at some point this year to improve the top six, what are your thoughts about that?
The biggest thing that I don't like about predictable needs that a team has, going out looking for players that it basically broadcast around the league that they want. You're trading from a weak position, which means you're going to give up more than you should. And we've seen that happen over and over again. I would say if there was a deal, but it should be one that it really has to benefit the Leafs, not only in the short term, it has to benefit them in the long term, because a lot of the short-term improvements they made on their team in the past 3-4 years have evaporated. There's nothing, they've got nothing for that. Not only do they not have the draft picks, they don't have the players that they gave that stuff up for. That's the danger. So when you ask me whether they should do it or not, you want to talk about a cautionary tale, that's as cautionary as it gets.
Yeah. Like here, I think what the cautionary tool that I've always had the issue with, and this is especially in the Kyle Dubas here, I have no problem making trades and trying to get players that are going to help you be competitive. No issue with that. Draft picks don't always work out. We've seen it with the Leafs. Unfortunately, the drafting record hasn't been stellar. So you go and you get a Dakota Joshua. Well, yeah, you pay. There's got a bit of a higher cap, but you pay a fourth round pick. Sorry for him. You got him for 2 more years because he's not a free agent until 2028.
Michelli fits the same category.
Michelli, he's in the final year of his deal, but he's an RFA. So you control his rights, and you only gave up a 3rd round pick for him. I can understand
a guy that people are thinking is going to start on the first line, if you can imagine.
Yeah, top 6 forward for a 3rd round pick. I would do that, right? And when you think about what the Leafs have given up from their own system, right? Okay, you gave up a Fraser Minton. That's a young prospect, right? That you saw as one of among your top. I think at the time probably would have considered him a top 5 prospect when they traded him. You got Brandon Carlo, but you have Brandon Carlo for 2 more years. You didn't give it up for a 30 and up defenseman.
A big, good defenseman.
Yep, 28 years old, manageable cap hit because you also got some retention on it as well, right? I'll look
Absolutely.
at the Nikita Grabankin one. Well, you got Scott Laughton for next year after this. 30 years old, a little bit on the older side. I mean, 30 is, in my opinion, is not old, but for some people that's old. But you didn't give up. You gave up the 1st round pick. I think was more valuable than the Grabankin, just because of the type of player he was. Right.
Absolutely.
This is where, because of too often that we have seen this Leafs team move. I think of the Trevor Moores, the Carl Grundstrom, the Sean Durzees, guys who are obviously filled out more of a role, but they went and they got those deals. I didn't really hate too much because, okay, maybe the Jack Campbell one, it started okay, then it didn't. The Jake Muzzin one, that worked out pretty okay. Those were the deals I was okay with. I just wasn't okay with the 1st round pick for Nick Foligno, right? 1st round pick for Ryan O'Reilly without him being signed, right? It was those ones that I think hurt this team. And that's why when I'm looking at the Easton Cowan one, that scenario, I'm not trading Easton Cowan for a rental. If somebody were to tell me putting up that deal, I would say no way. Only if there's a deal with the player that's either signed or is going to sign, right? You can't leave it up to chance that you're going to trade for a player and maybe he decides to stick around. Well, sometimes we find out that doesn't necessarily happen. We thought maybe the Leafs could get Ryan O'Reilly signed. Well, no, he never really wanted to stay in Toronto. Maybe that would have changed with if Craig Berube was in the fold, maybe that would have changed a little bit, but I doubt that. Honestly, I doubt that. So that's kind of where I think the cautionary tale has to be. If you're going to move in Easton Cowan, it cannot be for a rental. And I think this team's lack of draft picks also kind of show that you can't just part with an asset like that without having a for sure, okay, at least we're covering ourselves for, more than just 1 year if we're going to do that type of move.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think, the situation, David, that I think underlines what you're talking about when you say trading away young players. I think that we have a situation now in Toronto where you have a coach and a general manager who, in my opinion, see eye to eye on what they want to do. There's very little daylight between the two. If I can go back to the Dubas thing and him talking about his worst regret or one of his biggest regrets, for him, my biggest regret would have been when Mike Babcock immediately after the first playoff and then repeated it into the season and into the next playoff, was he wanted guys that were a little more abrasive, and he wanted a good shutdown defenseman. Not only did he talk to Dubas about it, he talked about it through the media, and he told the media, this is what I wanted. And Dubas never did anything going in that direction. I know Babcock left, but we heard him talk about how organized and how intelligent Babcock was as a coach and a taskman, right? And to say that And not having listened to what he said is another one of those regrets that he's subliminally sending when he talks well about Babcock, is because he didn't listen to Babcock when he should have, and the Leafs wouldn't be where they are today. Then when you get into his new coach, the guy that he picked, I believe there was daylight between the two, because if you remember that Apple documentary,
Yeah, the Amazon one. Yep.
Right? Oh, Amazon. Thank you. My bad. Amazon. Correct. He rode Marner in the locker, in the dressing room before they went out for the third period. He rode Marner, and you could see right then and there that he didn't have the patience for Marner, and that friction was never dealt with. And again, when you talk about giving up players, David, you can't give up on players you have, and you have to figure out which players you have that you can't keep. For me, that was one of the important moments when I figured if it was a time for him to pick between the player and the coach. So when you make moves, it's not just the young guys that you trade away. It's not just the guys you bring in. It's the guys you have in the organization. The same thing with Marchment. A misstep was obvious. He felt he made a misstep. And I believe the Marner misstep with his coach, Keefe, was another one. And you're giving away young players because you're trying to hold on to an idea that isn't working.
Yeah. Essentially, you gotta trust in the development that you have internally. And you gotta that's I think the area where the Leafs just never really figured out. Right. Helping those players. You're trying to help young players learn how to become winners. Yeah, they may have won at different points in their careers, but winning on the big stage, right? Sometimes you need to help them. You need to find the ways to help them get to that point. And that's where I think Babcock initially started off pretty good, but obviously the message wasn't being received well enough.
He got a little too funky.
Yeah, it didn't really work out in the end because the message wasn't being received enough. And I think that had more to do with why this team has not been able to get over the hump. People say, oh, they don't have the ability to do it. Well, that ability has to be developed, and you have to put them in the position to get there. So that's why I think that's why they brought in Craig Berube. That's why they've made the changes that they've made. And you got to hope that does happen now, because you don't get infinite amount of cracks at this, right? With this current group,
the window or the door can close on you, and if you look at what Marner did in junior, he won a Memorial Cup. He had a Kachuk on his wing. Go back to the point that I made before, and that is there has to be balance on the team. You have to have a bit of everything, right? You can't have just one type of player, because if you only have one type of player, then all you need is one type of defense to neutralize those players. There's no complication involved. Heighten the aggressiveness, throw some threats out there. And you've got a good mix to distract those good young players who aren't accustomed to dealing with that kind of stuff and didn't have players who could play. They had guys who were sitting out. They had guys who were sitting on the bench, but they didn't have guys who were playing with them to help to negate that intimidation factor that those great young players came so close against Washington, and people really felt they had a shot. If everything disappeared because they just didn't build on what they had.
Yeah, no, for sure. Gee, Frank, we had nothing really to talk about today, did we?
Well, you had me on here, so we can talk about a boll weevil walking across.
It's not just you. Mike and I have our tendency. It's the Italian factor, I always say. Us Italians don't know when to be quiet, and we don't know when to end this. But I will do that here. I want to thank you for listening and supporting the Locked On Leafs podcast. And if you did enjoy today's Locked On Leafs podcast, make sure for your second listen, you go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast. There is no off season, guys. We bring you the daily league-wide stories that matter most with the local coverage from the people you love here at the Locked On Podcast Network. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On These podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts from. Follow myself at @D_Morassutti. You can also follow Frank on YouTube. Go to just search Candid Frank. live on YouTube. You can also find him on all the social platforms as well. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.